What if I told you that the strongest men in the world are also the loneliest? Not lonely in a pathetic, desperate way, but alone by choice, by design, by necessity. You see, there's something about truly powerful men that most people completely miss, and it's costing you your personal power every single day. Alan Watts spent decades studying this phenomenon, and what he discovered will challenge everything you think you know about success, relationships, and what it really means to be a man in this world. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to talk about. Every time you make a decision based on what others will think, every time you seek approval before taking action, every time you compromise your values to fit in, you're giving away a piece of your power. And most guys are doing this so often, they've forgotten what it feels like to be truly independent. They've become addicted to external validation, and that addiction is killing their potential. But what if there was another way? What if the very thing that society tells you to fear, walking alone, is actually the key to everything you've ever wanted? What if the reason you feel stuck, frustrated, and unfulfilled isn't because you need more people in your life, but because you haven't learned how to be complete without them? Stay with me because in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you the 8 specific reasons why every chosen man, every leader, every innovator, every man who's ever created something meaningful had to learn this one crucial skill. And by the end of this video, you'll understand not just why walking alone is necessary, but how to do it without becoming bitter, isolated, or disconnected from the people who matter. This isn't about becoming a hermit, it's about becoming the kind of man others naturally want to follow. Listen, there's something most people completely miss about walking alone, and it's costing them their personal power. See, when Alan Watts talked about the chosen man, he wasn't describing some hermit hiding from the world. He was talking about you, the guy who's figured out that there's a massive difference between being alone and being lonely. A chosen man embraces solitude because that's where real strength is forged. It's in those quiet moments, away from the noise and opinions of others, that you discover who you really are underneath all the social conditioning. Think about it this way. Loneliness is like being hungry for junk food. It's a desperate craving for any kind of connection, even if it's toxic or meaningless. But being alone? That's like being a chef who owns his own restaurant. He doesn't need to eat out every night because he's got everything he needs in his own kitchen. When you're comfortable in your own company, you stop making desperate choices just to fill the void. You stop settling for relationships, jobs, or situations that don't serve your highest good. That's the kind of independence that makes other people both respect and fear you. Here's what I want you to understand. Every truly great leader, innovator, or visionary in history spent significant time alone. They had to. You can't hear your own voice when everyone else is constantly talking. Steve Jobs took those famous walking meetings alone to think through Apple's biggest decisions. Einstein said his best ideas came during solitary walks. These weren't antisocial guys. They were men who understood that authentic leadership starts with leading yourself, and you can't do that in a crowd. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is something most self-help gurus won't tell you. The moment you become genuinely comfortable walking alone, something almost magical happens. People start gravitating toward you, not because you need them, but because you don't. There's something incredibly attractive about a man who's complete in himself, who brings value to relationships instead of trying to extract it. And that's exactly what society fears most about the independent man. You know what keeps most people up at night? It's not the chosen man who walks alone, it's the example he sets. See, when you stop seeking approval from others and start living according to your own truth, you become a walking reminder of what everyone else could be doing but isn't. You become living proof that the excuses they're making for their mediocre lives are just that, excuses. And that makes people incredibly uncomfortable. They'll try everything to pull you back into conformity, because your independence threatens their carefully constructed illusion that they have no choice. Think about the last time you made a decision that went against the grain. Maybe you turned down a promotion because it didn't align with your values, or you chose to travel instead of buying a house because freedom mattered more than status. Watch how quickly people around you started questioning your choice. They'll use phrases like, "be realistic," or "think about your future." But what they're really saying is, "stop making me question my own compromises." Nonconformity isn't just about being different, it's about being authentic. And authenticity is terrifying to people who've spent their lives pretending. Here's something Alan Watts' philosophy taught us that most people don't understand. The herd mentality isn't just about following trends or social media. It goes deeper than that. It's about the fundamental human fear of taking responsibility for your own life. When you walk alone, you're saying, "I'm responsible for my happiness, my success, my failures, and my growth." Most people would rather blame their circumstances, their upbringing, or their bad luck than face that level of personal accountability. Your independence reminds them of the power they've given away. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets really interesting. The same people who criticize your choices are often the first ones to ask for your advice when their conventional approach isn't working. They secretly admire your courage even as they publicly question your wisdom. And that's because deep down, they know something you've already figured out. There's a price to pay for authenticity, but it's worth every penny. Let me be brutally honest with you about something. Choosing to walk your own path isn't free. It's going to cost you friends who can't handle your growth, family members who don't understand your choices, and colleagues who feel threatened by your refusal to play office politics. When you develop the inner strength to live authentically, you'll discover that some relationships in your life were built on your willingness to be smaller than you really are. And when you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, those relationships will either evolve or end. That's not a bug in the system, it's a feature. Take Steve Jobs, for example. When he insisted on his vision for Apple and refused to compromise his standards, the board fired him from his own company. He lost his job, his identity, and many relationships. But that rejection forced him to walk alone and discover what he was truly capable of. When he returned to Apple years later, he created the most valuable company in the world. That's the price of authenticity in action. Short-term loss for long-term transformation. But here's what most people don't realize about this price. It's not a loss, it's an investment. When you sacrifice relationships that were holding you back, you create space for connections that can actually support your growth. When you stop trying to please everyone, you attract people who appreciate the real you. When you quit jobs that don't align with your values, you open yourself up to opportunities that do. The price of authenticity isn't really a cost, it's an exchange. You're trading comfort for growth, approval for respect, and conformity for freedom. And here's where Alan Watts would probably smile. The moment you stop trying to avoid this price, it stops feeling expensive. When you accept that walking alone sometimes means walking away from things that no longer serve you, you discover something incredible about developing your inner compass. Here's something that'll change how you make decisions forever. Chosen men don't need external validation because they've developed something most people never cultivate, an unshakable inner compass. This isn't some mystical concept. It's a practical skill that can be developed through consistent practice. Your inner compass is that quiet voice that knows what's right for you, even when the whole world is telling you something different. It's the part of you that recognizes truth when you hear it, feels aligned when you're on the right path, and gets restless when you're compromising your values. Most guys spend their entire lives looking for someone else to tell them what to do. They want their boss to give them direction, their spouse to make the tough decisions, or society to provide a roadmap for success. But here's what Alan Watts understood. The moment you start depending on external guidance for internal questions, you become a follower in your own life. Try this. Spend just 5 minutes in complete silence every morning. No phone, no music, no distractions. If you can't handle 5 minutes without anxiety or the urge to check something, your inner compass is weaker than you think. Here's a simple framework I call the daily check-in method. Every morning, ask yourself, what do I actually want today? At midday, pause and ask, am I living my truth right now? Before bed, reflect on, which decisions today were mine and which were influenced by others' expectations. The more you practice listening to your inner voice and acting on its guidance, the stronger it becomes. It's like building a muscle, use it or lose it. And the beautiful thing about having a strong inner compass is that you stop needing other people to validate your choices. But here's where it gets really powerful. When you trust your own judgment, when you navigate life without constantly seeking approval from others, something interesting happens to how others see you. They start looking to you for leadership. Here's one of the most counterintuitive truths about leadership. The men who have the greatest influence are often the ones who care least about influencing others. Think about that for a second. The chosen man who walks alone isn't trying to build a following. He's following his own path so authentically that others naturally want to know where he's going. This is what I call the leadership paradox. True leadership comes not from seeking followers, but from developing such a clear sense of direction that people can't help but notice where you're headed. Alan Watts understood this perfectly. He never asked anyone to follow him, but his authentic journey inspired millions. Most guys think leadership means having all the answers and never showing weakness. But authentic leadership, the kind that comes from walking alone, is about having the courage to ask the right questions and the wisdom to know when you don't know. When you're not performing for others or trying to maintain some image, you can be honest about your struggles and uncertain about outcomes. Ironically, this makes people trust you more, not less. They can sense that you're not trying to sell them anything or manipulate them into following you. You're just being real, and in a world full of fake leadership, authenticity stands out like a lighthouse. Here's what's fascinating. The chosen man's approach to leadership is completely different from the corporate, hierarchical model most people recognize. He doesn't lead through titles or authority. He leads through example and authenticity. People follow him not because they have to, but because they want to see where his path leads. He creates influence not by trying to change others, but by focusing so intensely on his own growth that his transformation becomes magnetic. It's leadership from the inside out, and it's incredibly powerful because it's not dependent on external circumstances or other people's permission. But this kind of leadership comes with its own challenges. When you're walking your own path and others are following your example, you've got to break free from something that holds most people back their entire lives: the desperate need for approval from the crowd. Let me tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. Most of your opinions aren't actually your opinions. They're borrowed from your family, your culture, your social media feed, or whoever happens to be the loudest voice in your environment. The chosen man who walks alone has done the hard work of separating his authentic thoughts from the collective programming he's been fed since childhood. This isn't about being contrarian for the sake of it. It's about having the intellectual honesty to examine your beliefs and the courage to change them when they don't serve your growth. Breaking free from herd mentality is like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having. Here's a practical exercise. Write down 10 strong opinions you have about life, work, or relationships. Then next to each one, write where you learned that opinion. Was it from personal experience, or did you absorb it from family, media, or friends? You'll be surprised how often you can't actually defend your position with personal experience or independent reasoning. Maybe you hate a certain type of music because your friends do, or you think success means a specific lifestyle because that's what society told you. The herd mentality isn't just about big philosophical questions. It shows up in the smallest daily choices, from what you eat for breakfast to how you spend your weekends. One of the most liberating realizations you can have is this: you don't owe anyone an explanation for living differently. When you stop seeking approval from others, you stop feeling the need to justify your choices to them. You can eat differently, work differently, spend money differently, and relate to people differently without having to convince anyone that your way is right. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive. It means becoming secure enough in your own judgment that you don't need external validation to feel confident in your decisions. That's true independence. But here's something most people don't realize about breaking free from the herd. It doesn't mean you have to walk alone forever. When you develop this kind of independence, you actually become capable of forming much deeper, more authentic connections with others. Here's something most relationship advice gets completely wrong. They tell you to be vulnerable and open and authentic, but they don't teach you how to do it from a position of strength rather than neediness. The chosen man who walks alone doesn't avoid relationships. He enters them as a complete person rather than someone looking to be completed by another. When you're comfortable in your own company, when you've developed your inner compass and broken free from seeking constant approval, you bring something entirely different to your connections with others. You bring yourself, not your need. Think about the difference between how you act when you're desperate for someone's approval versus how you act when you genuinely don't need anything from them. In the first situation, you're performing, trying to be what you think they want, measuring your words and managing your image. In the second situation, you're just being yourself, relaxed, authentic, present. Which version of you do you think is more attractive to others? Which version builds deeper, more meaningful connections? The chosen man understands that relationships built on neediness are actually quite fragile, while relationships built from wholeness tend to be incredibly strong. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant or unavailable. It means showing up as yourself, fully, authentically, without apology, and allowing others to do the same. When you're not trying to extract validation or security or entertainment from other people, you can actually see them clearly and appreciate them for who they are rather than who you need them to be. You can love without possessiveness, support without enabling, and connect without losing yourself. That's what building relationships from strength looks like, and it's incredibly attractive to other whole, healthy people. But here's where this gets really interesting. When you master the art of being alone and the art of connecting with others from strength, you tap into something deeper, a sense of purpose that goes beyond personal relationships and touches the very core of what it means to be alive. Alan Watts had this beautiful way of describing the spiritual journey. He said we spend the first half of our lives trying to fit in, and the second half trying to stand out. But the real wisdom comes when we realize we were always already whole. The chosen man who walks alone isn't searching for himself. He's returning to himself. This is the spiritual dimension that most people miss. Solitude isn't about isolation. It's about integration. It's about bringing all the scattered pieces of yourself back together and remembering who you were before the world told you who you should be. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's the most practical thing you can do for your life. Think about how you feel after spending a weekend binge watching Netflix versus after a day hiking alone in nature. One leaves you drained and disconnected, the other leaves you energized and clear. When you spend time in genuine solitude, away from the constant input and opinions and distractions of others, something profound happens. You start to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that's been shaped by your parents or your culture or your fears, but your authentic inner voice, the one that knows what you really want, what you really believe, and what you're really here to do. Here's what Watts understood that changed everything for him. You don't have to choose between being connected to others and being true to yourself. The deepest spiritual truth is that when you fully embrace your individuality, you actually discover your unity with everything else. When you stop trying to be someone else, you realize you're connected to everyone else. The man who walks alone doesn't do so out of separation. He does so out of such a deep understanding of connection that he doesn't need to cling to others to feel it. He carries that connection with him wherever he goes. This is the ultimate paradox of the spiritual journey. The more comfortable you become with walking alone, the more you realize you're never actually alone. You're part of something much larger than yourself, not in some abstract philosophical way, but in a deeply felt, lived reality. And that realization changes everything about how you show up in the world. You become simultaneously independent and interdependent, self-reliant and connected, strong in your solitude and generous in your relationships. That's the mark of a truly chosen man, and it's available to anyone willing to take that first step down their own path. So here's where we are. You now understand the fundamental difference between being alone and being lonely. You know why society fears the independent man and what price you'll have to pay for authentic living. You've learned how to develop your inner compass and lead from a place of genuine strength. You understand the paradox of walking alone while building meaningful relationships, and you've glimpsed the spiritual dimension of this journey. But knowing isn't enough, is it? The real question is, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to close this video and go back to seeking approval from people whose opinions don't actually matter? Are you going to keep compromising your values to fit in with a crowd that doesn't even know who you really are? Or are you finally ready to take that first step down your own path? Here's my challenge to you. In the next 24 hours, choose one of these 3 actions. Say no to one social obligation that drains your energy. Spend 30 minutes completely alone without your phone, or write down one authentic opinion you've been hiding because you're afraid of judgment. Start with just one. That one authentic choice will feel so good, so aligned, so powerful, that you'll want to make another one. And another. Before you know it, you'll be walking your own path, attracting the right people, and living the kind of life that most men only dream about. But I've got to ask you something. If this video resonated with you, if it challenged you to think differently about strength and independence, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. Not later, not if you remember, right now. Because everyone tells YouTube's algorithm that this kind of content matters, that men need to hear these ideas, that we should create more videos like this. And if you're serious about your personal growth, if you want to keep getting content that challenges the status quo and gives you practical wisdom for living authentically, then you need to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it for the man you're becoming. Because the only thing worse than walking alone is walking without a compass. Share this video with one man in your life who needs to hear this message. You know who he is, the guy who's been playing it safe, seeking approval, compromising his truth. Don't tell him why you're sharing it. Just send it and let the message do the work. The path of the chosen man isn't easy, but it's the only path worth taking. The question isn't whether you're strong enough to walk it. The question is whether you're brave enough to start.